I'll be honest, taking that shortcut was probably the dumbest decision I've made in a long time. Everyone in town has heard the stories about the woods, how people get lost in there and sometimes don't come back. But it was late, I was in a rush, and the main road was clogged with traffic. I thought it would save me time if I cut through the forest. Looking back, I should have just waited in traffic. At least that was predictable. The entrance to the woods wasn't anything special. It was just this narrow, overgrown path barely visible from the road. I hesitated for a second, thinking maybe I should turn around, but then I told myself to stop being ridiculous. It's just a bunch of trees, right? No big deal. So I pushed through the thick branches and started walking. At first, it wasn't too bad. The light was fading, but I could still make out where the trail was, more or less. It was quiet, except for the occasional rustle of leaves and chirping of crickets. But the deeper I went, the weirder it started to feel. The trees seemed to get taller and closer together, and the air got heavier, like the whole forest was watching me. I tried to shake off the feeling and picked up the pace. I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Still, something about the place didn't feel right. Then, out of nowhere, I spotted him. At first, I thought it was just a tree stump or maybe a shadow. But as I got closer, I saw it was a man, an old man, standing completely still by one of the trees. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, staring at me. His clothes were ragged, like they hadn't been changed in years, and his skin looked pale, almost gray. His face was sunken, with deep wrinkles that made him look older than time itself. I tried not to make eye contact, but it was impossible not to. His eyes were so dark, like bottomless pits that just sucked you in. My heart started pounding in my chest, but I forced myself to keep walking. I figured maybe he's just some homeless guy, maybe he's lost too. But deep down, I knew something was off. As I walked past him, I glanced over my shoulder, just to make sure he wasn't following me. He hadn't moved. He was still standing there, watching. The way his head turned ever so slightly to keep me in his line of sight sent chills down my spine. I sped up, trying to get as far away from him as possible. The path was getting harder to follow. Overgrown bushes, fallen branches. Everything seemed designed to trip me up. My phone was in my pocket, but when I pulled it out, there was no signal. Of course. Why would there be? I shoved it back in my jacket and kept going. I don't know how long I walked after that, but the further I went, the worse that feeling got. Like I was walking straight into something bad. But turning back wasn't an option. Not with that creepy old man behind me. Every now and then, I thought I could hear footsteps off in the distance. They were faint, but definitely there. I kept telling myself it was just the wind or some animal, but I wasn't fooling myself. I was being followed. The sky was starting to darken faster than I expected, the sun barely visible through the thick trees. I had to find a way out of there and fast. I picked up the pace, trying to keep calm, but my heart was racing. Every sound seemed louder. Every shadow looked like it was moving. I could feel the weight of the woods closing in around me, like the trees themselves didn't want me to leave. Then I heard it. A twig snapped behind me, loud enough to make me jump. I whipped around, expecting to see the old man right there. But there was nothing, just the same thick trees and endless darkness creeping in. That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, but as I stood there, it got stronger. It was this rotten, earthy stench, like something had been dead and buried there for a long time. I covered my nose and kept moving, but the smell followed me, sticking to the air like a bad memory. I don't know why I didn't just turn around right then. Something about the old man, the way he stared at me. It felt like if I went back, I'd run right into him. And I wasn't sure if I could handle that. So I kept going deeper into the woods, hoping to find some way out. The path was barely visible now, and the darkness was creeping in faster than I expected. I told myself I'd be fine. I'd just find another road on the other side and be back in town in no time. But the truth was, I had no idea where I was going. That's when I heard the voice. A low, raspy whisper like it was coming from all around me. "You're going the wrong way." I froze. My heart skipped a beat. Slowly, I turned around, and there he was again. The old man, standing not 10 feet behind me, his pale face barely visible in the fading light. I couldn't believe it. The old man was standing there again, as if he had never left. How did he get ahead of me? My brain scrambled for answers, but nothing made sense. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise as he just stood there, motionless, watching me with those same sunken, lifeless eyes. "You're going the wrong way," he repeated, his voice low and raspy, like it hurt him to speak. I didn't say anything at first, just stared at him, trying to figure out what to do. My heart was racing. I glanced around, looking for any other path I might have missed, but all I saw were trees, thick and looming, blocking out what little light remained. The woods were swallowing the day whole, and soon it'd be completely dark. I was already starting to lose my sense of direction. I swallowed hard and forced myself to speak. "What do you mean? I'm just trying to get to the other side." I thought this was the shortcut. The old man's lips curled into a faint, unsettling smile. His teeth were yellowed and crooked, barely visible behind his dry, cracked lips. "There's no other side for you. Not from here." My chest tightened. "What are you talking about?" I took a step back, suddenly feeling the need to put distance between us. "I just need to get out of these woods." The old man's smile didn't waver. "These woods don't let people go so easy," he said, taking a slow step forward. "You've already gone too deep. Now the forest decides if you leave." I shook my head, trying to laugh it off, but it came out shaky. "That's ridiculous. It's just a forest. People hike through here all the time." I glanced at the path behind him, half expecting someone else to appear, like this was all some kind of prank. But we were alone. "No one hikes here," he said, his voice dropping lower. "At least not anymore." A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. My hands were clammy, my thoughts scattered. I reached for my phone again, desperate to check my GPS, but when I pulled it out, the screen was blank. Dead. Of course. I hit the power button a few times, but nothing happened. No signal, no battery, nothing. My heart sank. I was really on my own? The old man stepped closer, his movements slow, deliberate. "You won't make it out on your own," he whispered, his breath heavy and sour. I clenched my fists, trying to control the panic rising in my chest. "What do you want from me?" I asked, the words sharper than I intended. "Why are you following me?" He stopped moving, tilting his head slightly to the side, as if the question confused him. "Following you?" he muttered. "No, it's not me that's following you." I froze. The way he said it, the way his eyes gleamed in the dim light, sent a chill down my spine. My thoughts raced. If it wasn't him, then what was it? I forced myself to stay calm, but I could feel the forest closing in on me, the darkness creeping faster than it should. "I don't believe you," I said, trying to sound firm, but my voice cracked at the end. "I'm leaving. I'm getting out of here." The old man's smile faded, and his eyes darkened. "Suit yourself," he said softly, "but you won't find the way out. Not tonight." I turned away from him and started walking, faster this time. My hands were trembling as I shoved my dead phone back into my pocket. Every step felt heavier, like the forest itself was trying to hold me back. I kept telling myself I just had to keep moving, that the main road had to be close by now. But with each passing minute, the trees seemed to get denser, the path narrower, and my sense of direction was fading fast. That's when the first real wave of panic hit. I wasn't just lost, I was trapped. The trees around me were taller, thicker, and no matter which way I turned, it all looked the same. I couldn't see the sky anymore, just the dark silhouettes of branches twisting above me like bony fingers. The wind had died down, leaving only the eerie silence of the forest. I stopped for a moment, trying to catch my breath, trying to get my bearings. I thought about going back to where I saw the old man, but the idea of seeing him again made my skin crawl. Plus, I didn't even know if I could find my way back to that spot. Suddenly, there was a sound, something behind me, a soft rustling in the bushes. My heart skipped a beat. I spun around, half expecting to see the old man again, but the path was empty. The rustling stopped as soon as I turned. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. No answer, just silence. The kind of silence that's too heavy, like it's waiting for something. My throat tightened. I wasn't sure if I should keep going forward or turn around and retrace my steps. Then there was again, the rustling, but closer this time. Too close. It wasn't just the wind or an animal. It was deliberate. Something, where someone was moving just out of sight, tracking me. I felt my pulse racing in my ears. "Who's there?" I yelled, trying to sound brave, but the fear in my voice was obvious. I waited, holding my breath, but there was no reply. I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted, running blindly down the path, not caring where it led, as long as it took me away from whatever was out there. Branches whipped at my face and arms, but I didn't stop. I didn't care. I just had to keep moving. My mind was racing, replaying the old man's words over and over. "You won't find your way out alone." Panic gripped me tighter as I stumbled over roots and rocks, barely able to see where I was going in the fading light. The path twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the forest, and no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was right behind me, something that wanted me to keep going in circles. Finally, out of breath, I slowed down, my chest heaving with exhaustion. I leaned against a tree, gasping for air, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I had no idea where I was anymore. Every direction looked the same, dark, endless, and suffocating. And then in the distance, I saw it again, a figure standing perfectly still among the trees, watching me. I stood there, panting, my legs shaking from the sudden sprint through the forest. The figure I had seen in the distance, there was no mistaking it this time. It was the old man again. But how? How was he always ahead of me? No matter how far or fast I ran, there he was waiting. His presence felt like a shadow that stretched longer and darker the deeper I went into the woods. He didn't move, just stood there with that same unsettling stillness. His posture was relaxed, his arms hanging at his sides, but his eyes, those deep, hollow eyes, were fixed on me, piercing through the gloom. I felt trapped under his gaze, like I couldn't move even if I wanted to. I wasn't sure what to do. Running hadn't worked. Calling for help was useless. The forest was a maze, and I was completely disoriented. My throat felt dry, and my mind raced through every possible way out, but none of them seemed real anymore. It was like the woods themselves were keeping me there, like the trees were growing closer together, hemming me in with no escape. Taking a shaky breath, I finally spoke, my voice hoarse. "What do you want from me?" I wasn't even sure if I wanted to know the answer. The old man took a slow step toward me, his boots making a soft crunch on the forest floor. He seemed more solid now, more present, like the forest was giving him strength. His presence was suffocating. "I told you before," he said, his voice still gravelly but clearer now. "You're going the wrong way." I clenched my fists, feeling the dirt beneath my fingers, trying to ground myself, trying to hold on to some sense of control. "You keep saying that, but you're not helping." I snapped, frustration and fear mixing in my voice. "If you know the way out, just tell me. I don't have time for this." His lips twitched, almost into a smile, but there was no warmth in it. He took another step closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "I can help you," he said slowly, as if savoring each word. "But help doesn't come without a price." A chill ran down my spine. Something about the way he said it, the way his eyes gleamed in the fading light. It didn't feel like a simple offer. It felt like a trap. "What kind of price?" I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. The old man stopped, now only a few feet away from me. Up close, I could see the deep lines etched into his face, the way his skin seemed almost brittle like old paper. His clothes were ragged, barely holding together, but he stood there with an air of authority, like the woods answered to him. "Everything has a cost," he said softly. "A life for a life, a way out for something in return." I shook my head, stepping back instinctively. "What does that even mean? You want money? I don't have anything on me. I just need to get out of here." His eyes darkened, and for the first time, his voice took on a sharper edge. "You think money matters out here? This forest doesn't care about your coins or your phone. It wants something else. And you've already stepped too deep into it." My pulse quickened as I tried to process what he was saying. "You're not making any sense." I almost shouted, my fear starting to break through the thin layer of calm I had been holding on to. "If you know the way out, just show me. Why are you playing games?" The old man took another step closer, and I realized just how tall he was. He towered over me now, casting a long shadow that seemed to stretch unnaturally far in the dim light. "I've been here longer than you can imagine," he said, his voice almost a whisper now. "I was just like you once, lost, confused, desperate to leave. But the forest, it doesn't let go easily." I stared at him, my mind racing, trying to make sense of his words. "What are you saying?" I asked, though part of me already knew. You're trapped here?" He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "This place keeps you. It pulls you deeper, draws you in, until you can't find your way back. It needs someone to stay. That's the only way anyone gets out." I felt the air leave my lungs in a rush. The weight of his words settled on me like a heavy stone. "So what? You're saying someone has to take your place?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It sounded like something out of a nightmare. The old man's eyes locked onto mine, and for a brief moment, I saw something in them. A flicker of sorrow, maybe regret. "I've been here for longer than I should have," he said quietly. "I found a way out once, but I didn't take it. Now it's your turn. You have a choice. Stay or leave. But if you want to leave, someone else has to stay." My stomach turned. "You're insane," I muttered, backing away from him. "This is crazy. I don't believe you." The old man didn't move, didn't try to stop me. "It doesn't matter if you believe me," he said, his voice calm. "The forest has its own rules. You'll see soon enough." I turned and started walking away, my steps quick and frantic. I couldn't deal with this, couldn't deal with him. I just needed to find the main road to get out of these cursed woods. But even as I walked, even as I tried to put distance between me and the old man, his words kept playing over and over in my mind. "Someone has to stay." I pushed through the trees, the branches scratching in my arms and face. The darkness was closing in fast now, and I was losing what little light was left. My breaths were coming in short gasps, panic creeping into every thought. I didn't know where I was going anymore. I didn't even know if there was a way out. And then, as if to mock me, the path twisted, turned, and led me right back to where I had started. The old man was still there, standing exactly where I had left him, his face calm, patient. He didn't speak this time, just watched me with those dark, knowing eyes, like he already knew what was coming next. The offer still hung in the air, unspoken but clear. I stood there, staring at the old man, my mind spinning. Every part of me wanted to scream, run, do anything to get away from him. But no matter which way I went, I kept coming back to the same spot. It was like the forest itself was mocking me, trapping me in some cruel loop that I couldn't break out of. The old man hadn't moved, hadn't said a word, just stood there like he had all the time in the world. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for something, waiting for me to make a choice. I wanted to yell at him, to demand he tell me the truth, but a part of me was terrified of what that truth might be. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down, trying to think rationally. Maybe this was all just a big coincidence. Maybe the forest wasn't some mystical trap. It was just a forest, and I was lost. People get turned around in the woods all the time, right? But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, I couldn't shake the memory of the way the path had twisted back on itself, leading me straight to the old man again. I couldn't explain it, and that scared me more than anything. I glanced up at the darkening sky. The last slivers of sunlight were almost gone now, swallowed up by the thick canopy of trees above me. I didn't have much time before the forest was completely dark, and the thought of being out here with no light, no direction, it was unbearable. I needed to find a way out now. Swallowing my pride, I finally spoke. "You said you could help me." "Fine. Help me then. Show me the way out." The old man's expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of amusement, maybe even pity. He took a slow, deliberate step toward me, his boots crunching softly on the dry leaves beneath him. "I told you before," he said, his voice calm, almost gentle. "There's a price." I clenched my fists, my jaw tightening. "I don't care about your riddles or your prices," I snapped. "Just get me out of here." For a moment, he didn't respond. He just stood there, watching me with those cold, empty eyes. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Very well," he said quietly. "But once you leave, you can't come back. No matter what happens. Do you understand?" I frowned, confused. Why would I ever want to come back here? He didn't answer, just stared at me, waiting. Fine, I muttered. I won't come back. Just get me out. The old man stepped forward again, and this time, I didn't move away. He was close enough now that I could see every wrinkle on his weathered face, every crack in his dry lips. His presence was suffocating, filling the space between us with an invisible weight that made it hard to breathe. You'll follow me then, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And you'll do exactly as I say. No questions, no second guesses. You break the rules, and you stay here. Forever. I swallowed hard, the word forever, hanging in the air like a death sentence. I won't break the rules, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The old man nodded once, satisfied, then turned and started walking. I hesitated for a moment, watching his hunched figure move through the trees with surprising ease. Then, realizing I had no other choice, I followed. The path he took was one I hadn't noticed before, a narrow trail that wound its way through the thick underbrush. It was hard to see, almost hidden by the dense foliage, but the old man seemed to know exactly where he was going. Every step he took was measured, deliberate, as if he had walked this path 1,000 times before. I stayed close behind him, the sound of our footsteps the only thing breaking the eerie silence of the forest. The deeper we went, the darker it became, until the trees above us formed a solid wall of black, blocking out any remaining light. I could barely see where I was going, relying on the old man's silhouette to guide me. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours, and still we kept walking. My legs ached from the uneven ground, and my chest tightened with every breath of the damp, musty air. I wanted to ask him how much farther we had to go, but his warning echoed in my head, no questions. So I kept my mouth shut and followed, hoping he knew what he was doing. Then, without warning, he stopped. I nearly ran into him, the sudden halt catching me off guard. I stumbled back a few steps, my heart racing. "We're here," he said quietly. I blinked, looking around. "Here?" I echoed, confused. "But there's nothing." Before I could finish, the old man reached out and touched something. A small lever hidden beneath the tangled roots of a large tree. There was a soft click, and the ground beneath me shifted. I stumbled, barely keeping my balance as a hidden door swung open in the earth, revealing a dark, narrow passage leading straight down. My stomach twisted into knots. I stared at the gaping hole in the ground, a cold sense of dread creeping up my spine. What is this?" The old man didn't answer right away. He looked at me, his expression as unreadable as ever. "This is your way out," he said simply. I shook my head, stepping back. No way. I'm not going down there." His eyes darkened. "You made a choice. Now you have to follow through." I hesitated, glancing at the dark passage again. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn around, to run, but where would I go? The forest had already proven it wouldn't let me escape. The old man was my only option, and he was leading me underground. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped closer to the edge of the pit. The darkness inside was absolute, swallowing everything whole. I couldn't see the bottom. I couldn't even see the walls. "You said you wanted to leave," the old man reminded me, his voice soft but firm. "This is the only way." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. And if I don't go down there?" His gaze didn't waver. "Then you stay here, with me, in the forest." I didn't like either option, but I had no choice. With one last glance at the old man, I took a deep breath and stepped into the pit. The ground gave way beneath me, and I fell. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. The fall wasn't as deep as I expected, but the darkness was disorienting. For a moment, I just lay there, staring into the black void above, gasping for air. My body ached from the drop, and my mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. When I finally pulled myself up, my hands brushed against the cold, damp earth beneath me. I reached out in front of me, feeling around for something, anything that would give me a sense of where I was. The ground was uneven, rocky, and smelled of wet decay. There was no light at all, just the oppressive, suffocating blackness. My breaths echoed in the small space. bouncing off walls I couldn't see but knew were there, enclosing me. Panic started to rise in my chest, threatening to take over. I had no idea where I was, how deep underground this place went, or how to get out. Every instinct screamed at me to get back to the surface, to climb out of the pit and run as far away from the forest as possible. But there was no going back. The door had shut behind me with a soft thud, sealing me in this underground maze. I forced myself to focus. The old man had said this was the way out, and despite everything that had happened, part of me still believed him. After all, what other choice did I have? I couldn't wander the forest aimlessly anymore. If this was the only way, I had to see it through. I started to move, feeling my way along the walls, my fingers brushing against the cold stone. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through in some places, and the air was thick with the stench of rot and dampness. Each step I took felt heavier than the last, my legs aching from the long trek through the woods earlier. But I kept going, driven by the faint hope that this tunnel would lead me out, that I could finally escape this nightmare. As I walked, strange noises echoed around me. Drips of water, distant creaks, and the occasional soft shuffle, like something moving just out of sight. I tried to convince myself it was just the sound of the earth settling, maybe animals burrowing somewhere nearby. But every now and then, I could swear I heard something else. A whisper, faint but unmistakable, carried on the stale air. "You'll never leave." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice was so faint, I could have imagined it. But it felt real, too real. My breath quickened as I strained to listen, hoping to catch more. But there was only silence now. The kind of silence that presses against you, making you hyper-aware of every beat of your heart, every ragged breath you take. I shook my head, forcing myself to keep moving. "It's just your imagination," I whispered to myself, though my voice sounded hollow in the confined space. "You're just tired. Get a grip." But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, the unease wouldn't go away. It clung to me, growing stronger the deeper I went. The tunnel twisted and turned in ways that made no sense, like it was designed to confuse me. There were no markings, no signs, just endless blackness and the sound of my footsteps echoing off the stone. After what felt like an eternity, I saw something, a faint glimmer of light ahead. My heart leapt, finally a way out. I quickened my pace, stumbling through the narrow passage as I pushed toward the light. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't natural light, but rather the glow of a single, flickering lantern hanging from the wall of a small alcove. The alcove was circular, like a hidden chamber carved out of the earth. The walls were lined with strange markings, symbols etched into the stone, none of which I recognized. But it wasn't the symbols that caught my attention. It was the figure standing in the center of the room. It was the old man. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart racing, my skin crawling. He was standing there, as if he had been waiting for me all along. But something was different now. His posture was straighter, more imposing, and his face looked younger, sharper, like the years had melted away from his features. "You made it," he said, his voice smoother now, almost soothing. "I told you this was the way." I stared at him, my mouth dry, my mind struggling to comprehend how he had gotten here. How did you?" I stammered, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "What is this place? What's happening?" The old man smiled, but it wasn't the same eerie grin from before. There was something almost relieved about it. "This is your final test," he said calmly. "The forest let you come this far, but now you must choose." I shook my head, confused. "Choose? What are you talking about?" He stepped closer, the glow from the lantern casting shadows across his face. "The forest doesn't just let people leave," he said softly. "It requires something in return. A life for a life. That's the rule." My stomach churned as the weight of his words sank in. "You mean you want me to?" "I don't want anything," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "But the forest does. It always has. That's how it works. Someone must stay behind, so that another can leave." I took a step back, shaking my head. No, that's insane. I'm not doing that. I'm not leaving someone behind. The old man's smile faded slightly, his expression turning serious. It's not about what you want, he said. It's about survival. You can stay here, wander these tunnels forever, or you can do what's necessary to escape. The choice is yours. I felt sick. My head spun, my legs weak beneath me. You've done this before, haven't you? I asked, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was all the confirmation I needed. I backed away from him, my heart pounding in my chest. No, I'm not like you. I won't. Before I could finish, the old man raised his hand, stopping me. You already made the choice when you stepped into the forest, he said quietly. Now, it's time to follow through. The air in the chamber grew heavy, the weight of the old man's words pressing down on me. I glanced around, desperate for a way out, but the tunnel behind me was dark, endless. There was no escape, not unless I did what he said. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do. The old man was watching me, waiting. The forest was waiting too. And deep down, I knew I couldn't stay here forever. I stood there, paralyzed by the weight of the decision in front of me. The old man's words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. A life for a life. My mind was spinning, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to comprehend what he was asking me to do. The dark tunnel behind me felt like it was closing in, and the flickering lantern light in the chamber cast long, twisted shadows on the walls. The old man watched me, his expression calm, almost patient. He seemed to know that I was running out of time, that the forest itself was waiting for me to make a decision. But I couldn't wrap my head around it. How was this real? How could someone be expected to trade lives just to escape a forest? I don't understand, I finally said, my voice hoarse. How can I take someone's place? There's no one here but us. What are you really asking me to do? The old man's eyes softened, as if he pitied me. It's simple, he said quietly. The forest won't let you leave unless you give it something in return. A life must stay behind. That's how it's always been. I was once like you, lost, desperate to escape, but I learned the rules. I shook my head, backing away from him. No, that's insane. I can't just take someone's life. He stepped closer, his expression never changing. You don't have to, he said softly. You can stay, if you prefer. The forest will take you, and I'll be free. That's the choice. I blinked, my mind reeling. I had been so focused on escaping that I hadn't considered the true nature of the offer. It wasn't about choosing someone else's life. It was about choosing my own. Either I took his place, or I became the one who stayed behind. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was the life that had to be traded. You've been here all this time, I whispered, the pieces slowly falling into place. You've been waiting for someone to take your place. The old man nodded, his eyes darkening slightly. The forest chooses who stays and who leaves. I've been trapped here for longer than you can imagine. Every few years, someone else wanders in, lost like you. I offer them the same choice, but not all of them make it this far. He paused, his voice lowering. You're the first one in a long time who's gotten this far. I stared at him, my throat dry. How many people have you left behind? The question came out before I could stop myself, but I needed to know. The old man didn't flinch. He simply looked at me with that same calm, measured gaze. Enough to survive, he said, without a hint of shame. Enough to keep going. That's all any of us are trying to do here, survive. I felt sick. My legs felt weak, and I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the uneven ground. No, I can't do this. I'm not going to trade my life for yours. He sighed, as if he had expected this reaction. You're not trading with me, he said. You're trading with the forest. It doesn't care who stays and who goes, only that the balance is kept. I could feel my chest tightening, my breathing becoming shallow as the walls seemed to close in around me. My mind raced, searching for some way out that didn't involve making this impossible decision. But there wasn't one. The forest had made its rules clear. Someone had to stay behind. What happens if I don't choose? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The old man's expression hardened, and for the first time, I saw a hint of frustration in his eyes. If you don't choose, the forest will make the choice for you. And trust me, it won't be kind. You'll be trapped here, just like me, wandering these woods, slowly losing yourself until there's nothing left but the forest. The weight of his words pressed down on me, suffocating. I could feel the forest's presence all around me now, like it was watching, waiting for me to make my move. There was no escape, not unless I made the choice. My mind flashed back to the beginning, to when I first entered the woods, thinking it was just a simple shortcut. How wrong I had been. I thought about the old man watching me from the trees, his unsettling gaze following me no matter where I went. I had been walking right into his trap, into the forest trap, from the very beginning. You knew this would happen, I said, anger rising in my chest. You knew I would get lost. You've been waiting for this moment. The old man didn't deny it. He simply nodded, his expression unreadable. Yes, the forest brought you here for a reason. It's been waiting for someone like you, strong enough to survive, smart enough to make it this far. He paused, his voice softening. You were chosen. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The truth was clear now. The old man had been playing me from the start, leading me deeper into the forest, guiding me toward this moment. But it wasn't just him. It was the forest itself, twisting and turning around me, trapping me until I had no choice but to face this impossible decision. The realization hit me like a wave, and I felt a cold numbness spread through my body. I had no way out. The forest had brought me here to replace the old man, to take his place so he could be free. I looked at him one last time, my heart pounding in my chest. His face was calm, his eyes patient, as if he had already accepted his fate long ago. He wasn't evil, not really. He was just another victim of the forest, like me, doing whatever it took to survive. But I wasn't like him. I couldn't stay here, trapped in this nightmare forever. I had to get out, no matter the cost. I'll leave, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But you have to stay. The old man's eyes darkened, but he didn't argue. He simply nodded, as if he had known all along that this was how it would end. So be it, he said softly. And just like that, the decision was made. The air around us seemed to shift, the weight of the forest lifting ever so slightly. The old man stepped back, his expression unreadable, and gestured toward the tunnel behind him. The way out is that way. You'll know when you've reached it. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked past him, my legs heavy, my heart racing. The tunnel stretched out before me, dark and endless, but I didn't stop. I kept walking, knowing that the old man would never follow. He was part of the forest now, just as I would have been. As I moved deeper into the tunnel, I felt the air grow lighter, the suffocating darkness lifting bit by bit. And then finally I saw it, a faint glimmer of light up ahead, the way out. But as I approached, a single thought echoed in my mind, chilling me to the bone. Would the forest ever really let me go? The light grew brighter, and with one last breath, I stepped into the unknown.